Hi everyone, this is Ricky Spencer, and welcome to another of our Sociology of Media Voices series. And today we're going to be deep diving into, I guess, in sometimes an old topic, but always seems to resurface, and that's the banning of literature in public libraries. And I wanted to really take a kind of different approach this time and really kind of hear from somebody from the community who really understands and maybe can try and look at it from different angles to give us a bit of an insight as to why some people in the community have a problem with LGBTIQ inclusive content in public libraries. We're very fortunate today to have a wonderful human being by the name of Hank Paul. Their pronouns are they and them. They are co-founder of TheyConnect, and they are the current lead for Transgender Victoria communications and fundraising lead. Welcome to our podcast, Hank.
Thank you, Ricky. It's really lovely to see you again.
So tell us a little bit about, before we deep dive into this whole area, tell us a little bit about yourself, Hank, and so your background in terms of your marketing and your passion for inclusivity.
Sure, thank you. Yeah, I was a wedding photographer for a really long time, and I ran my own business. I was in business when we had the big debate back in 2017 around whether we wanted to legalize same-sex marriage, and that was really the start for me about realizing that I could use my voice and my platform for advocacy and speaking up, not just for myself, but for others in our communities. And over the years, I guess like that has really evolved into the advocacy piece has really evolved into much more of a, I guess, like I've felt really drawn to that for a career, and really have been looking at ways that I can embed that as a core passion of mine into the vocation that I choose. And so today, as you mentioned, I now run, I co-founded a inclusive marketing consultancy called
Mm.
TheyConnect, where we work with large consumer brands that want to create marketing campaigns, often for, Pride Month or Mardi Gras or Midsummer. So we provide consultation there to make sure that their campaigns feel much more authentic and rooted in community and supporting community rather than kind of flashy tokenism. And then in addition, as you said, I also work as the marketing and communications lead for Transgender Victoria, which is a role that is relatively new for me, but it's incredible to find myself working with such incredible humans. And I mean, that's how we met, is through the work at TGV, and seeing just kind of on the ground the impact that we have on a day-to-day basis. So yeah, that's a little, I guess, a little bit of context to where I come from in this conversation as well.
And for those listening and who may not be aware, can you tell us a little bit about what is TGV?
Yeah, TGV. So Transgender Victoria are a leading body that supports trans and gender diverse people across Victoria. And we like to say that we support everyone on their gender journey. So that is whether you're at the very start of your journey or maybe you've been on the journey for quite a long time. We are here to support you in whatever way that might mean. But I think particularly TGV is really focused on that social and peer support. A lot of people think about the ways that trans and gender diverse people need support when it comes to medical intervention, thinking about like hormones or surgery, maybe. Um, and whilst those forms of gender affirmation are super important and really matter to trans and gender diverse people, we essentially say, all right, we'll do everything else. So anything that's not that medical affirmation is stuff that we can support. So we support people financially, we support people by offering like peer navigation services for folks who maybe need help finding a psychologist or a surgeon or whatever that next step is on their gender journey. We run a lot of events and opportunities for networking. So yeah, it's really just about how do we build this community of trans and gender diverse people across the state and really meet people where they're at.
Mm. So let's begin for some of the deep diving issues that were currently
Mm.
circulating in Australia
Oh boy.
and around the banning of books. So let's begin. Like, how does the banning of same-sex relationship books in public libraries impact the representation of LGBTIQ individuals in literature?
Yeah. Look, I've been thinking about this. So I guess like the context behind why we're talking about this, Ricky, is there's a city council in Sydney,
Mm,
Cumberland Council, that have it's just this week come out that they voted in favor of removing some certain LGBTQIA plus parenting books from the public libraries that they fund and operate. And there's been huge discussion within community that you and I have both been a part of, which is to say, this is incredibly harmful. It's really disappointing. We're seeing like conversations that probably were happening 30 years ago kind of come back in a way that feels really out of step with the zeitgeist. And
mm,
I don't really know why we're here. This isn't the US, like it's really perplexing. So it's really important that we have these conversations and we can't take for granted that this, the representation that exists for us as, as trans people, as queer people, we're so fortunate to live in a day and age where we have that representation, but we can't take that for granted. So I think that that really speaks to your initial question, which is to say that the problem with banning LGBTQIA plus books of any kind of content is that we're talking about minimizing and silencing diverse perspectives, which is something that I think literature for all of time has done really well, is to say you can read a plethora of human experiences and you can learn from experiences that you don't have because someone else took the time to write their story. So I think that we are a less interesting and a less colorful, a less flavorsome society if we ban these books of diverse perspectives.
mm. And in what ways do you think the availability of diverse books that you just mentioned in public libraries can influence acceptance and understanding of LGBTIQ plus relationships?
I think, coming back to this specifically when we're talking about Cumberland Council and some of the logic or the reasoning behind why they've done this really stems from you hear what the councillors themselves have said, and they're quoting statistics about what percentage um, of their city population are Christians and what percentage of their city population are people who are born overseas with a different cultural background. And whilst those things can be true, I think that by banning these books, you're also then making assumptions about the fact that all Christians or all people who were born overseas or all Muslims somehow share the same view when it comes to the inclusion and celebration of LGBTQIA plus Australians. And that's just not the case. By banning these books, you are further perpetuating this stereotype that is to be religious and supportive of queer people are somehow mutually exclusive. When I know for a matter of fact that those two things can live in coexistence and that you can be a Christian and you can be supportive of queer people. You can be a Christian and be a queer person. And anything that sells you a narrative that is different to that is just not true.
Mm. How can censorship of LGBTIQ literature in public libraries perpetuate harmful stereotypes and stigmas?
Well, I think aside from what I just said about it's perpetuating stereotypes that to be a person of faith and to be against LGBTQIA plus inclusion, um, when those things, like, don't have to go hand in hand. So apart from that, I think like other stigmas and stereotypes that this type of censorship perpetuates is that, we still have young queer people, or I mean, not even young, we still have queer people who are figuring themselves out. And when we somehow say something that marginalizes and others the identities of these people, that they feel more shame and less ability to come to terms with who they are and feel proud of who they are. And that's really, really sad to me. It's really, that's the direct harm that a decision like this creates.
And Hank, I want to now sort of take you back to your life and your journey
Mm.
in affirming who you are, the person you are today. And how has your experiences of accessing LGBTIQ material and your experience of public libraries, how has that experience been for you? And would that have made a difference in your life if any of this type of our living experience was not allowed in public libraries?
Mm. Yeah, I don't know if I can speak to the public libraries specifically, but in my life, I was raised Christian. I went to a Christian school, and I can tell you that at my school library, there was no queer content.
Mm.
And that for me, like, that the problem was that I didn't have the representation or the visibility of identities that I saw myself in. And that's a gift of public libraries. That's a gift of literature itself, is that we may not know fully who we are until we see someone else and we resonate with their story or their identity. And I think, like, digging a bit deeper, growing up as a Christian, whether it was at my school library or anywhere else, I just was never shown role models growing up of what it could be like to be queer and live a fulfilled, thriving life. And it took me into my adulthood to find those role models and to see a bright future for myself. And we actually have the power to start those stories much earlier in a person's life. And we know that that leads to better mental health outcomes for young LGBTQIA plus people.
And that sort of leads on to our next question quite perfectly. How does the banning of same-sex relationship um, books in public libraries impact the mental health and well-being of our LGBTIQ community, and especially young people?
Mm. Well, I think it's about belonging. We need that fundamental sense that we belong on this earth and in our community to feel like we can get out of bed in the morning. And if you don't, we know that that is a key driving factor in mental ill health, is if you don't feel like you belong. I love thinking about, like, my dad's garden. He's a amateur gardener. He's got kind of 2 square meters out in his backyard that he's really put a lot of love and attention into, and he's growing sugar snap peas that bring nitrogen into the soil and feeding other plants around. And he plants sunflowers that burst up super high and cast this big shade over some of the more fragile plants. And, bees come and pollinate the sunflowers. And even within his tiny little 2 square meter garden, it's this grand ecosystem. And every plant, every animal, every insect, every drop of rain, like, it has a role to play and a place to belong. They're all different, but they belong together. And that for me is like a beautiful picture of what our society could and should and sometimes does look like at its most beautiful version. that's like diversity makes us all a more interesting and flourishing community. And by banning these books and limiting the visibility of diverse identities in our community, we're all worse off for it.
Mm. How can overturning the ban on same-sex relationship books in public libraries contribute to building more of an inclusive and embracive and of diversity society?
Well, I really hope they overturn this ban. I don't really know how legally sound this decision was, and I think you mentioned you might be talking to someone who has a bit more of that legal background to know, like, is this something that can be upheld? Will it be overturned? I don't really know, but you know, if we really look at what the best outcome would be in overturning this ban, I think it tells people that as a society, we're not going to put up with this discriminatory um, uh, treatment of LGBTQI plus people and LGBTQI plus parents in this instance by treating them as anything other than parents.
Mm. What steps do you think can be taken to advocate for the inclusion of LGBTIQ literature in public libraries and challenge censorship?
Mm, yeah, I mean, I would say maybe I'm just in my little bubble at the moment, but I'm like, I feel like there's just so much good queer literature that people can access and read, and that's like actually good. And so I would definitely encourage, you know, people who are interested in understanding different people's experiences and identities, you can go, whether it's to a library or to a bookshop or, you know, on your Audible app or whatever, you know, the most ethical place for you to access a book is, and you can actually hear from queer authors about their lives. And it's just such a beautiful way to build empathy and understanding for people who are different to you. So I would definitely encourage people, you know, when there is an appetite and a need for certain books, then, you know, whether it's libraries or bookshops, they then want to stock what people want to read. So you could just question, like, what kind of content are you reading, and do you want to diversify it a bit? Um, I also think, like, specifically with Cumberland Council, Equality Australia are hosting a petition on their website right now. So depending on when you're listening to this, you can head to their website and actually go and sign this petition, which is going to be presented to the Cumberland Council the next time they meet, which I think is next week or the week after. So, yeah, you can just show your support by signing a petition and spend 12 seconds doing that.
Mm. I want to now ask you, Hank, being a professional photographer, your work is in capturing, images of people's most important parts of their life or their own footprints. And how important has it been with your experience with the marriage equality that we've got through in Australia, and you perhaps working with couples who wanted to take the step and legalize their marriage through a union through the church? What can you share some of that, how that has impacted your life?
Oh, specifically through the church with that perspective. I'm just trying to think, definitely one, maybe two or three, but yeah, it's not many, but I have shot queer weddings that have been ordained by church ministers. Not many, because most churches in Australia still do not recognize any marriage as valid unless it is a heterosexual marriage. So that's still, I think, like a big barrier for LGBTQI plus Australians, is actually seeing churches embrace them and celebrate their relationships. But I have photographed some couples, and they've been married in a church building by a church minister and ordained by them. That The one that I'm thinking of specifically, like it was really affecting and really beautiful because it was important to that couple, and they they wouldn't take no for an answer. So the actual church that they attended at the time wouldn't marry them, but they found a church that would. And I think, it's really it's beautiful to see. I never had a version of what it could be for me to get married to someone of the gender that I love. Um, that was never modeled to me as a young person, and that broke my spirit. It it impacted my mental health in ways that to this day I still have to navigate. And then, on the other side of that, fast forward, 10 years or so, and then be the person to photograph this beautiful love story that is also embedded in a very faithful relationship and commitment. What a privilege. Yeah, I don't know what else to say about it. It's just that it's beautiful and that exists. And I
Mm.
think people don't often realize that queer Christians exist and queer Muslims exist and queer people of faith around the world exist and have always existed and will always exist.
Hank, that's a beautiful way to end this podcast because I think it highlights the message of hope. And the reality is that we exist. We have in the past existed, we exist in the present, and we will exist in the future.
Mm,
And the trying to banning of a book or books serves no other purpose than bringing, back to the foreground that censorship has no place in 2024 in Australia, in the Western world.
mm.
Thank you for spending some time with us, Hank Paul.
Thank you so much, Ricky. It's lovely to chat with you.